Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we have a special look at the one, the only, the original 1980 film, Friday the 13th, directed by Sean S Cunningham. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's film, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. I'm going to do that sentence again. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, editor of this summer's Castle of Horror anthology. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth, lead singer and bassist of the band Desert of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Also in Austin, writer of the long-running underground comic series Halloween Man and winner of the 2018 Best of Austin Award from the Austin Chronicle, Mr. Drew Edwards. Say hello.
You're doomed.
It has a death curse. And
a death curse.
I love that. Finally, also in Denver, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello.
Hello.
Hello. Gosh, what a movie. All right. Okay. This is what Wikipedia says about the film. I will give you the bare minimum. Friday the 13th is a 1980 American slasher film produced and directed by Sean S Cunningham and written by Victor Miller. It stars Betsy Palmer, Adrienne King, Harry Crosby, Laurie Batram, Mark Nelson, Janine Taylor, Robbie Morgan, and Wren himself, Kevin Bacon. The film tells the story of a group of teenage camp counselors who are murdered one by one by an unknown killer while attempting to reopen an abandoned summer camp. Supposedly prompted by the success of John Carpenter's Halloween, Cunningham put out an advertisement to sell the film in Variety in early '79 while Miller was still drafting the screenplay. It came out in May of 1980. It was a huge success, and it has had practically a billion sequels, and there's been a reboot and so on. And we have with us Drew Edwards, who to me is one of the biggest Friday the 13th fans I have ever known in my life. He's also the writer of the amazing Halloween Man comic series. So when we get our opening thoughts, I want to start with you, Drew, and then we'll go Julia and then Tony, and then I'll just get us into the conversation. So we're going all the way back to 1980. Sometimes we'll talk about looking forward, but I just want everybody to pretend that this is the only movie. That would be the one way to accomplish it. If you want to deviate from this, what are you going to do? I know I'm not going to stop you. But Drew, tell us about what happened in 1980, Friday the 13th.
I can't do that, Jason. I hate to disappoint you. I can't, because this is not the first Friday the 13th movie I saw. What made me fall in love with the franchise? That was Friday the 13th Part 3D.
Yeah.
But I will attempt to analyze this movie as much as I can on its own strengths while also contextualizing it as part of the franchise throughout this conversation, because I do think this is as much as what is this movie is it's hard to divorce it from everything that has come afterwards, so much to the point that I've come around to thinking at this point in my life this movie is best viewed as a prequel to all the movies that came after it, even though it is a sequel, or even though it is the original. I do really, really, really think that this is a much better movie than a lot of film critics give it credit for. I think there's a lot going on here, particularly the opening sequence to me is very evocative of the 1931 Dracula, and I would definitely like to get into that when we're talking about it. Fun movie to watch. It's a good one, of the better 80s slasher movies. Yes, I do think it's a little fair to call it a Halloween knockoff, but I don't think that's all that it is. So even though this is not my favorite Friday the 13th movie, not even by a long shot, I would actually say this is one of the ones that I watch probably, it's not one of the ones I go back to and rewatch the most. I do think this is a much, much, much better film than a lot of people give it credit for. It's got a really nice atmosphere. The New Jersey countryside is beautiful in this. And there's a lot of fun character acting going on, particularly Walt Gardney as Crazy Ralph, and of course the incomparable Betsy Palmer as Mrs. Voorhees, who just chews up all of the scenery in her path. What a horror movie villain she is. So I'm really excited to talk about that. I'm sorry that I was not able to exactly do what was requested of me, but my
No.
passion is going to get the better of me a lot tonight. So fair warning.
Well, let me toggle what I said slightly and say it's not that I want people to completely divorce themselves from what they come out of, but I would like us to constantly keep one eye on where our consciousness would be if this were the only Friday the 13th movie. If we were sitting in May of 1980 and we didn't know what was coming, I think it's worth continually dragging ourselves back to that and try to divorce ourselves from what we know of the later. With that in mind, Julia, I don't know if you've ever seen Friday the 13th. I don't know if you know jack all about the other Friday the 13th movies. So why don't you tell us, what are your opening thoughts about this film that we call Friday the 13th?
Well, I don't remember if I saw this originally or if I know I've seen some Friday the 13th movie or movies, but honestly, I don't remember which ones because it's all kind of a blur. I am not going to say I'm a fan of this film. I find it misogynistic and a little too gory. However, there are some things that I certainly appreciate about it. I appreciate, what kind of it's helped set up along with Halloween for the future of horror movies. I appreciated watching it as a parent of children who go to. I never went myself to summer camp as a kid. I went to a camp, but it was like a 4-day church camp thing, and so that kind of counted, but not really. It was in high school. But my kids go to a traditional summer camp, and so was kind of fun watching the film, thinking about like what if like imagining walking around the camp that we go to. And then I think it's a creative twist at the end. It's unexpected for sure, and I can't wait to talk about that, how that comes to be, and kind of going back through the film after the end, thinking about how all that had to have played out. Anyway, so I'm excited to talk about it. Some of the trivia about this movie is pretty interesting as well, and so I think that'll be fun to go through.
Very cool. Tony, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was telling Drew earlier, I will say I don't think I've seen this since high school. I'm almost positive. And I think 3 was my first Friday the 13th as well, on cable. I guess it was probably just the right summer, right time, right place to catch it. I do remember succinctly the body count in the movie being a thing at the time. And I think my aunt and uncle had seen it and were like, "Oh man, this is not for kids." And I remember the ads in the paper, the original like black and white newspaper ads, and seeing that and having them go, "Oh, that's what's with this movie." I like it okay. It's definitely not my Friday the 13th that I would rewatch, but I don't tend to watch rewatch a lot of slasher movies, which I don't know why. That's just how I lean, I guess. I never really thought about it until I was watching this and was like, oh yeah, I haven't seen this movie in a long time. It's got some, I like a lot of the camera work, and I think it kind of sets the pace for a lot of movies that come after it. And I kind of agree with Drew that it is, now when you watch it, you're kind of better off watching either start at 3 or start at 2 and then go backwards. Also, it eventually spawned one of the hardest video games I've ever played. Is if you want to throw a controller or want to smash your Nintendo with a hammer, then you can play the Friday the 13th game. Even though it's Jason centric, the game is, but he's got a little island with his mom's head on it, and everything a loving son should have. But yeah, I think there's a lot, and I think the movies that build off of this, I think this is an important movie because it kind of changes a few things in the horror genre. But it's not one I regularly watch.
Thank you. Yeah, just to go ahead and give my 2 cents. I really love this movie. I love this movie. I think number one, I love the setting. I just, to me, and we'll get into it more in detail, but I just want to run around inside of this. I guess this is rural New Jersey. I want to run around this.
It's Blairtown, New Jersey.
All right, and I love the little town. I love the little cafe and the whole mise en scène there, and the summer camp, and the goofy kids who are smoking pot and having sex and all that stuff. I love it. I don't think it's at all I was looking at the critical review notices of the day. I think that everybody's just got their head up their asses. I absolutely think, I don't even think it's fair to call this a Halloween knockoff. I think it's definitely a movie that probably wouldn't have gotten funded without Halloween, but I think it's its own thing. I think it's a campfire tale. And it's I guess it follows the root of Halloween, except for Halloween there was no mystery. This has a 10 Little Indians style mystery. Somebody's killing off everybody in this remote location. I really love it. And and I think that's a little unfair, but I guess it's useful to know from the top that I'm a person who I could watch this one over and over. There's just something
You love
about
it
this film.
enough to walk around shirtless and hit on your camp counselors?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny that the lessons, the way that people behave in here. I think we should get into that first. We'll start with, because I do want to do a thing about the setting, but I think we should go ahead and start with this interesting thing that Julia brought up, which is gender dynamics in Friday the 13th. Because what we've got going on here is it's 1980, so
I'm already shaking my head, by the way.
we're
Right.
probably
I mean,
filming in
as well you should,
1979.
but also, I mean, it is gender dynamics in 1980,
Yes.
for better or worse. I'm not,
Yeah. No, I mean, we'll have to take all of that into account. This guy Steve Christie, just to get us into the plot of what's going on. This guy Steve Christie, he has sort of bought up and inherited his family's camp, and he's going to get it back open up because the last time it was open was 1958 when a couple of camp counselors were killed. So it's been 20 years. And he's going to get it open, and to that end, he's hired a bunch of generally well-meaning and generally polite and well-presented older teens, probably college students who
Ned.
and
Like,
Ned.
you can say that. Generally well-meaning and Ned.
Yes.
Which I could watch. I could watch a whole movie of that dude getting the axe in different ways.
Holy
And he
mackerel.
wakes up and gets the axe again.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because
fuck that guy.
we've got who do we have? We have we have Alice, who is the one with the she's the most hardest working, the one who's been there longer in the camp. She's been there, I guess, for a week or so.
Important thing though about Alice when you're talking about gender dynamics,
Yeah,
especially the way this franchise is normally perceived.
Yes,
Alice is not your stereotypical final girl. She is
Yeah,
not.
why is that?
She has a relationship with her boss, or at least an implied one, so not virginal.
Right.
She drinks and parties and plays strip poker with the rest of the campers. The only thing that sets her apart is that she is more resourceful. So she does kind of, to me, fly in the face of what when we think about what an 80s slasher movie heroine is going to be. She really isn't that. And
they treat her like a mom.
Again,
I mean, she's a kid just like them, but everybody treats her like she might outrank them by a step or two. She seems to have come right after Steve Christie, and she's essentially kind of his chief lieutenant. And she has this Dorothy Hamill haircut, and she looks more momish than the rest of them. But yeah, she smokes dope and she sleeps around just like everybody else. And then there's Marcy and Brenda, and I cannot remember the difference between those two. Annie, and then the various guys. I apologize. I'm not going to.
You're not going to talk about Kevin Bacon.
I am going to talk about Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon plays Jack, who is,
and he always plays a character named Jack, like in every movie, pretty much.
No, he was Ren in.
No, that's true. But he does have. I was looking at this trivia thing, and it says he is Jack Brennan in Frost Nixon, Jack Morris in My Dog Skip, Jack Swigert in Apollo 13. Jack Ross and A Few Good Men, Jack Casey and Quicksilver, and then Jack in this movie.
Yes.
We can only hope that his final role will be Jack Jackson.
Oh, that would be yes. He plays the most resourceful among the boys. He's and so he plays off of Ned, who is a complete goofball. Who is the one who just can't sit still, who seems to be really manic, who's always doing weird voices and loopy Steve Martin-esque stuff. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
True story. I actually had a Venus flytrap named Ned for 2.5 years. Venus flytraps are hard to keep alive in Nevada because the climate does not agree with them. But I had a pet Venus flytrap named Ned, named after this character for the most grisly, which is that when the way the special effect looked when he got his throat cut, I
Yeah.
thought it looked like a Venus flytrap mouth. And so I named it. Yeah,
Oh,
and
well
looking
said.
back, looking back on that, I'm like, man, what was wrong with me in my late 20s? But
I think it's pretty great. Oh, and I should mention that the girl that Jack pairs up with, Marcy, she's so charming because when she is hanging out, after she's been sleeping with Jack, she gets up to go to the bathroom and I think she's taking a pill and she's just hanging out and she hams it up in front of the mirror and does a Katharine Hepburn impression.
Mhm.
And she's so charming. She's totally great. The thing is, I'm loving these kids, but okay, you got a bunch of kids who are come to work at this place. Julia, assuming for a moment that they're not all going to get killed shortly anyway. Tell me a little about what it is apparently to be a 19 or to 22-year-old woman going to work at a campsite in upstate New York or in
Well,
rural
and
New
not
Jersey.
even necessarily that old. I mean, some of these girls may be 17. Who knows? So okay, so in this, as portrayed in this film, and I honestly, given that I was 8 years old when this film was made, I don't know. I don't recall what it was actually like to be. I don't know what it was like to be an adult at that point. But every girl's appearance has to be commented on, like it always, and they're all, of course, they all have to be skinny and adorable because they're in movie and presumably just to be acceptable in general. So every guy says, or I think every guy, at least most of the guys, have a point at which they say to a female that she's beautiful or something, like something about commenting about their physique. Of course, we have them play strip Monopoly, and it's a girl who's going to end up having to be in her underwear,
But
and
it's the
then
girl who recommends that they play stripping out for what it's
yeah,
worth.
right.
Just pointing
And
this out.
then you've got Ned, our friend Ned, who who shoots an arrow at
Holy
a
mackerel!
female
Yeah.
character. And by the way, that's actually Tom Savini who shot who shot that arrow. But anyway, he's like shoots an arrow right where she is, which of course is very dangerous and definitely against the rules. He's just all kinds of obnoxious. He is he the one who pretends to drown, or is that somebody else?
Yeah.
that's them.
Yeah.
Was it Ned?
And later decides he's an Indian.
Besides,
Yeah.
Native American,
he
complete
pretends
with
to drown.
headdress.
He pretends to drown so that he can make out with a girl who's trying to get him mouth to mouth. Yes, he plays Indian. He's just obnoxious as hell, and it's really telling and funny that when everybody's missing, the one woman who's
Alice.
like, it was Alice. Alice keeps going, I wonder where these other people are, but she never mentioned. Like nobody ever wonders where Ned
Where
is.
are Marcy and Jack?
Nobody
she keeps
cares.
saying.
Yeah,
They
nobody
can
cares
only
about where
hope.
Ned is.
They can
We're like, we don't
only
give a crap
hope.
about Ned, but where are Marcy and Jack?
What is
Yeah.
the nature of Alice's relationship with Steve Christie? So Steve Christie owns the place.
I don't think
and
there's
he
any
goes-
reason to believe that she's ever actually been romantically interested in him. He just seems to be
Well,
like
their
romantically
conversation's
interested in
weird,
her.
though. It's weird. Because
Yeah, but
she's
she
like,
doesn't say anything about wanting to date him. She just is trying to not get in trouble with him, I think, because he's the boss.
do you think that?
Yeah.
I'm not.
There was
I'm not
something
disagreeing.
that they said that seemed to imply at least it seemed like they had went out, and then she was like, this isn't quite right, and then he's trying to get that back.
Yeah.
So that
So-
could be.
I don't think
So,
so. I think
not
he just
to- not
asked
to
me another
cut-
chance, but we don't know what that means.
Not to cut down what you're saying, Julia, because you have to base this on what's actually on screen. But they were supposed to have a relationship. There was actually more stuff that was in the script that didn't get shot of the two of them that were to imply that at one point they had been a couple.
Okay.
So like but your estimation of what's going on isn't wrong, because you again, you have to base it on what you're actually seeing, not pages that didn't even get filmed.
the way I read the conversation they have, he goes, it'll sustain almost any of those assumptions, because he says something like, you've been drawing these pictures of me. What does this mean? She goes, well, that's the way you were last night. And he goes, listen, look, I know you're not feeling right. Look, why don't you give it another week? And she goes, okay, I'll give it a week. So clearly there are people whose relationship, whatever the heck it is having some troubles, but there are also people who are pretty kind to one another, and pretty patient with one another. So they have a relationship. It's just unclear.
Yeah, but
what
he's
exactly
acting
it
as if
is.
he's never noticed that she was an artist, which means that if they did a relationship, it's brand new.
Oh, I have no idea what that means.
He's also kind of creepy about it.
Yeah, he's super
To be
creepy about it.
Yeah.
I think that we are intended to understand Steve as being the reliable one, the authority figure. He's sort of too old for everybody else. And that's kind of why the movie gets rid of him, and sends him off to do whatever the hell he's going to do in town for about 5 or 6 hours before he turns around and heads back to camp. I mean, one presumes that he's doing all kinds of things like getting permits and whatever, but towards the end of the day, he's just having dinner in the cafe, and he has, this relationship with the folks in the cafe while everything is going on. So the script just gets rid of him, and Alice, who is closer to the kids than to an adult like Steve, she hangs out with them, and she kind of pairs off with the final
Bill, I think,
the final
right?
guy. Yeah,
Bill. Yeah. Bill, who is played by the son of Bing Crosby.
Really?
Mhm.
This I did not know. Okay, so yeah, gender dynamics, but nobody. So yes, there's a constant sort of low-grade sexual harassment going on constantly in these.
Great.
I don't know what else to put it, but I will say a lot has been made over the years of how in films like this people always die after having sex, but the fact is, in this film, they just die no matter what. Basically, people can just die regardless. Ned just dies because he's wandering around. There's
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, Mrs. Voorhees, Pamela Voorhees, is going to kill all these kids no matter what they're doing, because she
Right.
just doesn't want them. She just doesn't want them to reopen the camp.
Yeah.
And like there's also the larger idea that's going on, and I want to save kind of my thoughts on that when we talk. I would like to backtrack and talk about the opening sequence.
Okay.
To me, which is the most interesting scene in the movie to me. But there is a death curse. Like, Camp Crystal Lake is cursed. So and whether that's Pamela causing it or the ghost of Jason Voorhees or whatever you want to think is going on in this movie, these kids are, as Crazy Ralph put it, doomed. So it has nothing to do, whatever puritanical logic that somebody wants to put upon it isn't actually part of the universe of this movie. If you go to Camp Crystal Lake, you're going to die because there's a death curse.
Why don't we start with that opening sequence you were just talking about? Because I completely don't know what you're talking. Okay. Oh, you're not talking about the teaser. You're not talking about the 1958. I'm talking
about Annie, the camp
yes.
counselor.
Well, why don't you drift into it and relate it to Dracula like you did? Because I think that's very interesting, and we may as well talk about that. Yeah.
So a little before I get into that, I want to give a little bit of background on why the tone of this movie is the way it is.
Okay.
So Sean S Cunningham, the director of this film, also worked on Last House on the Left, a Wes Craven movie, which is a very I'm sure a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast have seen it. Very grisly, very brutally realistic horror film. Sean S. Cunningham, when he had come back to horror, which was mostly a financially motivated decision, that after he had seen how successful Halloween was, he was like, okay, I'll go back to horror. But there was the deliberate choice to make something that was tonally not like Last House on the Left. And even the way Tom Savini's special, like, while this movie is very gory, and the gore is very almost cartoonish in the way it looks. And in fact, that continues throughout all of these movies for the rest of this franchise. And there is also the choice that this movie is just kind of one notch outside of the real world. It is set in the sort of campfire story. It's a ghost story. And because of that, there's all these kind of elements, as you already brought up, there's like element of mystery, even though this movie's not really a mystery, but it has elements of mystery to it. It also has elements of gothic in it. And in fact, the opening sequence of this film is almost exactly like the opening sequence of the 1931 Dracula, with Renfield coming into the Transylvanian village. We have Annie entering into Crystal Lake, the town, seemingly normal town in New Jersey, but literally everybody in it acts like a villager out of a Universal monster.
Yes.
And they're constantly
Yes, they do.
talking about curses. Camp Crystal Lake is cursed. Did you know a little boy drowned? Did you know people were murdered? Did you know there was fires? Camp Crystal Lake is cursed. They call it Camp Blood. It's not normal people in the real world do not behave the way people are behaving in this town, in this movie. And I find that very fascinating. And I don't know that they were deliberately trying to make it Dracula per se, but it's hard for me to not think that it was at the very least a subconscious influence. And you even have the character of Crazy Ralph, who is a soothsayer. He's basically, in the real world, he'd be the town drunk, but he's telling you, you're doomed. There's a death curse. You're all going to die. And he's actually right. Like, he's not wrong if you look at everything that happens after that. So even though this is a quote unquote slasher movie, there is already this sort of palatable aura, I cannot talk right, of the supernatural about it, of a ghost story.
Okay,
And
let me ask you a question. I want to interrupt you with just a question, because I want you to continue doing this, but I want to stop and look at a couple things you just said so I don't forget them. One was all the villagers, we'll call them that, suddenly looking, and they're very much like the villagers in Dracula. It seems impossible that that's not on purpose. It seems like like, I believe that the writer is thinking of that stuff, even if he can't quite remember, was that in Dracula? Was it in something else? There's no darn way that he's not thinking of those examples being there before. I also find it interesting to talk about something that's way in the future. The cabin in the woods makes a big deal out of Ralph, a character like Ralph, being an important part of the sort of the Stations of the Cross of a slasher film like this. I don't know if that's actually true. I think that Ralph is the only one I can think of. Is this normal? Does this happen all the time?
It's a thing in all of the Friday the 13th movies. Even Ralph is killed in the film.
And the Poltergeist movies
continue
too.
They continue to bring in characters like this throughout the Friday the 13th franchise, and I think it's to kind of keep this idea going. And you look at what the slasher genre became, because you had, we're thinking of like the big slasher movies. I'm gonna not talk about some. I know they exist. I'm not gonna talk about Peeping Tom or anything. I'm gonna talk about the ones that really stand out on most people's minds. You have Psycho, then you have Texas Chainsaw Massacre, then you have Black Christmas, and then you have Halloween. All right.
Yep.
Now, Psycho, even though it's got gothic elements to it, there's nothing supernatural in that movie. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, even though it's got some fairy tale elements, there's nothing supernatural in that movie. Now you get to Halloween, and there's like a veneer of supernatural, but they do try to play Michael Myers like he is even though it's mostly based in pop psychology, but they try to pay him like he's a real life psychopath. This is where you get into what slasher movies started to become. This is quote unquote supernatural slasher, the first true one. And because of that, you have movies like Nightmare on Elm Street, like Child's Play, like Hellraiser, like Candyman. None of those movies would exist. So I think why I wanted to pause and talk about this opening sequence, because I think if you did not have this, you would not have all of that. And that's why I don't think this movie gets as much credit as they do. Everybody was like, oh, Halloween ripoff. Oh, even, like this, and this. This stuff right here is really important to the building blocks of what 80s horror is going to become, and nobody talks about it.
I think that was really wonderful. And that opening, by the way, it's so funny how it veers back and forth between hyper stylized, like you're saying. It's very much like any of the characters in a Dracula movie stopping and saying, "I'm going out to the castle," and they're like, "Oh, the castle's cursed," and in this case, it's the campground. At the same time, they're living in the real world, and the lady behind the counter goes, "Hey Barry, can you give Annie a ride in your truck?" And he's like, "Sure, I'm going that way." So there's still real people. There's still guys living in New Jersey, and
But it's not our New Jersey.
right. That's a really good point. It is. And actually, can I use that as a jumping off point to something else that I kept thinking about as I was watching this? You're right that it's a fanciful New Jersey that contains no big cities in it, or at least once she enters this area, Crystal Lake, she is so far from civilization. There's only the villagers. But beyond that, I just wanted to mention to the listener, if you're of another generation from my own, I mean, I'm a Generation X guy, so I lived to see the world flip over from being an analog world to a digital world. And this movie is just completely in the analog world. It's nuts how isolated they are, just like probably 18 miles or less from town. They're out in a camp, and the electricity is spotty. Obviously there are no cell phones. There's no
Well,
nothing.
I want to add though to that's still the case when you go to camp. Like our kids' camp, you have to get if you're gonna download your directions onto your phone, you got to do that well before you get to the camp, because once you get to camp, you don't have any phone reception. So, and they're not allowed to bring phones. They don't have, if you want to send an email, which is a thing parents can do, there's a guy who has a computer and he prints out the emails and then takes them in the Daily Mail. So it's still that way at camp, even
Wow,
if
so
it's not
that's
that way the
cool.
rest of the
So
world.
so you could still have Friday the 13th happen
Yeah,
in a camp and just say,
for
"Oh, we
sure.
have all these rules. Nobody has a cell phone."
Well, not just rules, but there's no reception. Like when I go up there with my cell phone, I cannot get my GPS to work once we're at the camp. That's why I'm saying I can take screenshots of the map so that I can get back out of the camp
Yeah.
to get back to the road. But I can't send email, I can't receive phone calls, nothing.
So when
Like
you're when
I've
you're
tried to call my parents or whoever from that area, and there's nothing. So yeah,
when you're out there, do you hear? Shh, shh,
yeah, every
Oh
time,
yeah.
every single time.
Can I just point out what the heck is that? That's the other thing that pops up at the very beginning of this movie. So
It's
in other words,
throughout the movie.
1980. In the same way that a lot of what made the Eon James Bond films recognizable was there from the very, very beginning. That 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 weird voice, that thing.
Mama.
What is it?
It's supposed to sound like "kill her, mommy."
Yeah.
Are you seriously?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it's supposed to sound like.
It's an echo. I had no idea.
Well, it's
Here's I
it's
want to wait.
it's
I
music.
want to say something real quick about that before, and I know we're going to come back to it later. But it bugs me. Just before I forget, it bugs me that that at the end that she actually says, "Kill her, mommy." I'm just like, why can't she just have it be the voice in her head? Like, why can't we hear a voice as if the voice is communicating with her
Well, it's
psychically
not
or possessing her, or
it's not
whatever,
sound
instead of
effect.
having her say it?
It's not a sound effect. It's theme music.
No,
Like
no, but that's
it's
not my point. That's not my point. It just reminded me that when she says, "Kill her, mommy," and she's actually saying it with her mouth, that made me think, oh, that's just her being crazy. But then at the shot with where we have Jason jumping out of the water, I'm like, well, if he actually is this supernatural being that still exists, then why can't he communicate psychically with her? Why don't we just hear his voice like we did? At another point, we heard his voice.
Can we jump to that, because I think that's the next thing to talk about
Julia,
is what the hell's going on.
Julia, okay, what the hell is going on? They did everything that they wanted to do in this movie, like including the way Betsy Palmer act, because they thought it would be scary. Like they had no idea that this movie was going to become what it is, and in fact nobody really thought that Jason was going to become what he has become, which is a pop culture icon.
Right.
And Victor Miller, actually the first screenwriter, there's actually a ghost writer on this movie named Ron Kurz, who if you ask anybody who takes credit for the Jason character, how he in this film. Victor Miller wanted Jason to be a perfectly normal looking boy who just drowned. And he hated the idea of having Jason pop up out of the lake at the very end. But allegedly, like Ron Kurz likes to take credit for it, but the story I believe, the one I believe, is that it was Tom Savini's idea, because he was like, we need to have a really good stinger on the end, like Carrie.
Yeah.
But it says in the trivia that Victor Miller's the one who said that, who decided to do that.
Yeah, Victor Miller did not say that. Like I don't care what's on IMDb. Victor Miller changes his story a lot. Like, and the thing is everybody wants to take credit for Jason because of what Jason became. But the bottom line is, you look at these movies and the way they interlock with each other, there is no strict continuity. There is no strict reason or rhyme, because they were really flying by the seat of their pants. Now, as far as on within the movie, that's really open up to your interpretation. Is Alice dreaming? Is there really a ghost of Jason? I think they purposely kept that vague so you can kind of make up your mind. I think if you're, going into the sequels and whatever, you kind of have to take it on like, well, okay, Jason's kind of a supernatural being and he popped up at the end, because that's what makes the most sense going forward. In this actual movie, it's vague. You can make up your own mind. That's fine. But really, everything that ends up on the screen in this movie, including Jason popping up out of the lake, whoever came up with that idea, and it was a great idea, because that is one of the best jump scares.
Oh my god! I apologize. I have to apologize to Jason. I like punched him when that happened.
No, I mean that's a good jump scare. That is
classic.
And she had no idea it was coming. That was the most wonderful thing on the planet. Are you amazed? There's a human being in the country who didn't know that something was going to happen.
No,
in that
I actually did afterwards. I remembered
go back to that.
I remember that it happened after the fact. I just forgot when I was watching the movie.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Drew. Go ahead.
It lulls. Well, no, but it's such a good jump scare, and we love to knock jump scares a lot of the times on this show, but it lulls you into such a. There's been a few times where, even though I've seen this movie probably hundreds of times, where I will be lulled into this sense of calm, because like the New Jersey countryside is so beautiful, and even though that I know Jason's going to pop up, it still gets me, and but everything that is on the screen that happens in this movie is because they were trying to make the scariest movie they possibly could. So Jason popping up in the end, from a purely practical standpoint, is there because it's scary, and it is in fact really, really scary. And so there's a funny story about the Jason makeup. So Betsy Palmer, who plays Mrs. Voorhees, saw Tom Savini creating the appliances, because he literally was baking the latex appliances in the camps, because this was a real working camp. He was baking some of the latex appliances in the pizza oven for this camp, and she saw him putting together what was going to end up being the Jason makeup. And she says, "What's that?" And she's like, "That's going to be your son." And she's like, "Why does he look like that?" "Oh, he's a mongoloid." And I always just like to imagine, even though that's so un-PC, I always just like to imagine Tom Savini, because if you watch a lot of horror movies, you actually see Tom Savini acting sometimes, that sort of congenial Tom Savini voice, being like, "Oh, he's a mongoloid." So I don't know.
Yeah.
Good times.
Well, I mean, there's all kinds of words that we used back. No, I say we. I mean the society. But I mean, he's more than just. He's not. He doesn't just have a learning. I don't even know what we would call it, a learning disability. He's got this enlarged head. So yeah, he's got these physical deformities. And that's not it. The funny thing is, this could have been. It wasn't completely necessary. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying it's an interesting detail. It's one detail extra, I guess, to make us feel uncomfortable. Because the fact is, if the story is about this woman is crazy, or this woman is possessed, either way, by the spirit of her dead son who was drowned while camp counselors were being irresponsible, you don't need the kid to be developmentally delayed or deformed or anything. He's just, because in theory that could happen with anyone.
I
It's
think
an
it makes it a
interesting
little more
detail.
tragic, though.
I guess so. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean, especially the fact that the camp counselors weren't paying attention to him. It almost makes it more about the fact that he was, a physically deformed child. And
Yeah.
even though we know Jason goes on to be a horrible monster in his own right, it does elicit a degree of sympathy for him. And it kind of makes you understand why Mrs. Voorhees does what she does, even if you don't
Absolutely
agree with it. Like,
it's so the whole thing is just that is really, really tragic. Think that Mrs. Voorhees has this really severely challenged child, and then some other people are irresponsible and they let him die, and so now she's on this bloodbath of revenge. So far so good. I'm actually, I'm not saying I agree with her, but that story completely tracks for me. Now we add the supernatural element, which is under the lake there is bubbling a revived version of this boy who is communicating psychically, I guess, with his mom and saying kill them. I have a feeling they didn't know what the hell they were doing. I think they were just making this up as they went along.
Nobody was playing. Now there is the fan wake version that states that if she had not killed all these camp counselors, Jason would not have resurrected. Obviously, that was not.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think he wouldn't have resurrected if she hadn't died, because he would have just kept killing people through her. I like to believe that he's controlling her psychically, and that's why it bugged me that she moves her mouth to say "kill the mommy," because I prefer to have it be if it was just a psychic suggestion and she's kind of being possessed by him. So then the idea that they killed her, so now I have to go do the dirty work myself. That's how I'd like to think of it.
Or now he wants revenge because he wants to kill the people
Yeah,
who killed
avenge his mom.
the only person
Sure.
who loved him, because she obviously loved him.
Yeah.
So like it's and the one defining characteristic that Jason does have in Jason's not that multidimensional of a character, but the one thing they do go back to, he does love his mom so much that he keeps her severed head. But
for real.
I mean, it's definitely he has a psycho thing going on.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually we find like an altar, right?
That's in Friday the 13th Part 2. Like I think
and the video game, like I said,
and the video game, which is just as infuriating as you were describing.
I beat it once, and that was insane.
That's one more time than me.
Can I ask a question? I thought there was a murder in here, and it must be in one of the later films. And I apologize because I said I wouldn't go into the future, but I really want to know. Rain, wheelchair, machete, down the stairs. Which one is that?
That is one of the later movies, and I want to say that is in. No, it's not in 3. That might be in 4.
Okay.
But there is a guy in a wheelchair that gets the machete to the face. And it's a weird machete to the face because it's like the wrong end of the machete. It wouldn't have been the sharp end. So like Jason really put his upper body strength into it. But this one's got some good, Mrs. Voorhees, you see where Jason gets it from. She's got some ingenuitive kills in this.
Well, let's talk about some of them. Like when she kills Kevin Bacon, some of them happen off screen.
Okay, so wait. So first, let's go in the order. Actually,
you want to go in order? All right, we'll start with Annie.
She starts with Annie. So okay, Annie gets in the truck with the guy from town, and I was kind of suspicious of that guy, but he seemed okay. I was like, all right, well, maybe he's okay. So then she gets in this Jeep with the person that we never see, and that person starts driving too fast, and then misses the turn. And then Annie starts freaking out, like, oh my gosh, you need to take me back, stop, whatever, and decides finally that she's going to jump out of the car. I was telling Jason, I cannot imagine if that lady picks me up. I don't care how far she goes past where she's supposed to go. I'm not jumping out of that car, because I would never see her as a threat unless she suddenly brandishes a machete. I guess that could have happened, or a knife, or whatever she kills her with. I guess if she pulls that out, maybe then. But I can't, just because she doesn't doesn't turn around, I still wouldn't jump out of the car because I would still think I'm more at risk jumping out of the car than I am from this sweet old lady, even if she's being really weird right now. I think that's personally my opinion of what would happen. So that's why I'm saying, like, I kind of go back and evaluate each murder knowing what we know at the end. But I mean, once she's out, then of course, like, then she's kind of she's easy prey because there's nowhere to go, and I think she trips or whatever.
By the way,
she falls and hurts her leg. Yeah.
By the way, though, Drew, are you sure it's not in part 2 that has the wheelchair death?
The wheelchair death is Friday the 13th, part 2. I had to give it a ponder.
Yeah, I couldn't. It took me a bit too, because I mean, again, there's a lot of teenage death.
Yes.
Although that one's pretty memorable.
It is memorable. I mean, I remember seeing it as I definitely saw this movie as a kid, and I definitely saw part 2 as a kid. Definitely younger than my daughters. I mean, like 11 or 12, probably on HBO or whatever would have been showing them at the time. And I remember the cutting of Annie's throat very clearly, and then reading almost simultaneously, like in Twilight Zone magazine or whatever, how the trick was done. But I still didn't completely understand it until just the other day when I saw, because it's what it is a sort of trough on her neck that is closed and full of liquid blood. And as the knife prop is drawn across it, this trough opens up and the blood flows out. It just dribbles out. And I was like, okay, that makes sense, but how do you fit it on the neck? And the answer is the entire neck is the prosthetic neck. The whole piece is a rubber piece that is laying over the actress. It's brilliant. It's painted well. I mean, it looks great. This guy, Tom Savini, just amazingly talented. I mean, obviously.
Right. Well, and then you were talking about the Kevin Bacon one. Oh my, that one is crazy complicated, that effect. Because
okay, tell me about it.
In that one, you have to have Kevin Bacon is under the bed. His head is sticking up through the mattress. And then he's got the rest of him is a latex neck and chest. And then you've got Tom Savini. Everybody's under the bed, so it must be like a very deep, like it must be like feet. Anyway, so you've got Tom Savini under the bed, and the setup takes hours. So then Tom Savini's under there to plunge the arrow up through the fake neck. His assistant is supposed to operate this pump that makes the blood flow up through the appliance, and then somebody else is supposed to hold his head, like they can make his head down so that they can do that. And that was like the photographer. But the tube ended up, they only had one shot they were going to be able to do, and the tube ended up coming disconnected. So what's his name? Stavrakis. He grabs the hose and blows into it, and so that the blood comes out, and it makes it kind of bubbly. But anyway, so that was like such a crazy.
It's an astonishing effect.
Yeah.
Really, I can't think of anything before this movie where you see any sort of pointy thing punch through somebody's skin from inside. Yeah, it's just a rare thing to witness, and so it's deeply disturbing to see it on the screen because it's deeply disturbing to see, period. You just
and
rarely
everything happens so fast in this film. You don't ever have, and I don't know if that's a good thing. I actually think it would be I think it's more interesting when you do have it. You don't have moments of terror for these characters because basically they see, like, he feels the dripping on his face, and he looks at it and it's blood, and then he gets killed right away. And to me, I think it's a little more interesting if you have him suddenly go, "Oh my God, what is that?" and start to feel like terror of like what's going on.
I mean,
and then get killed. I don't know.
I mean,
just the last girl has that.
I don't know. I mean, Annie's running around scared in the woods, and
that's because the actual person's trying to kill them. I'm talking about the creepy, spooky stuff. Yeah. The final girl has that, but everybody else doesn't.
Marcy is the one who's like, because the killer. This is very much like Halloween. The killer screws around with all these people a lot or half of them anyway.
But not nearly as much as in Halloween.
I suppose that's true. I do suppose that's
I would like to ask you guys what you think is the difference between what's the same and what's different between this movie and this series and Halloween. Well, this movie and Halloween.
Question. Halloween to me, first off, has a very strong element of like pop psychology in it. Like they like throwing a lot of $4 words around that don't actually apply to anything that's going on on screen. And that isn't an insult. I think Halloween is a better movie than this. But you're asking me to tell you the differences. This movie is definitely much more about special effects than Halloween. Halloween's a lot more about creating a atmosphere. I think like it's exactly what you're talking about. Like it lingers on things a little longer. This movie's a little bit more fun. It's a little bit more cheeky. Like Betsy, I guess the closest equivalent, Betsy Palmer in this movie and Donald Pleasance in the first Halloween, they chew up about comparable amounts of scenery, but it's a little bit different because Donald Pleasance is playing, one of the protagonists, whereas Betsy Palmer is obviously very much the villain of this movie. We also don't get her until like the last 15 or so minutes.
Yeah.
The fact that this movie is rural instead of suburban gives them very different atmospheres. Like as somebody who grew up in the country, I always found this movie a lot more relatable than Halloween, where Halloween had that sort of and maybe Tony feels the same way, but because Halloween felt like the suburbs, it just wasn't anything that felt familiar to me.
That's interesting. We grew up in the suburbs, so I have this opposite feeling.
Thank you for saying that. Oh, go ahead, Tony. You were going to say something.
No, I'm with Drew. Also, I think another thing that kind of separates this is, I mean, there's been stuff before it, but the way that how much POV shots there are, how many POV shots there are, and the way that they are handled kind of sets it apart to me. I was noticing how much of that and how much that sets the tone for movies after this. Again, starting with the car scene where all the interaction is, hey, I'm talking to the camera the whole time.
Yeah, that's true.
And we don't get to see what starts to go, maybe this person isn't right. And then that continues throughout, when they see somebody in the woods and we get to see we're the voyeur and the killer at the same time for huge portions of the movie.
When you do see Betsy Palmer in the end, she's a normal, which is obviously something that doesn't happen in any of the sequels because the sequels focus on Jason. But
she's normal until she starts. Like until you realize it was her calling out.
She's not a monster.
Right. Yeah.
She looks normal. Like
exactly.
And in fact, like Betsy Palmer had like a very squeaky clean sort of image prior to doing this movie. And in the 50s had kind of like a blonde bombshell thing going on. So it's like a little weird to think about if you were somebody who grew up in that time period, what if you were a little bit older in the early 80s, how you would have felt about her suddenly being this maniac.
Well, I was trying to think if it's 1980 and I don't know what's coming, and I see this, and I don't know that this is going to set the tone for a lot of other movies. So all of a sudden, Betsy Palmer rides up in a car and gets out. Do I go, oh, thank God, an authority figure, and a 54-year-old white lady in a sweater? I guess we're in good hands now. And then she turns out to be bad, or do I immediately go, I don't like the looks of that lady?
No,
I just can't imagine.
That's what I'm saying. You definitely think, especially in a world where these men I'm going to say two things that are contradictory.
Go crazy.
I was going to say, in a world where men are constantly hitting on women and being all gross, then a kind of a little white lady would be, or any lady really, it doesn't matter what color she is, would be a welcome sight. However, there's also they don't seem to be that threatened by the men either. Like she gets in the car with the first guy and she doesn't seem to be, even though he makes comments about how pretty she is, of course, she doesn't seem to be creeped out by him. So I think there was definitely a lot more hitchhiking back then and less of this idea of like, I'm going to be raped by whoever picks me up. But I think they should have been thinking that because I think that was often the case.
Well, but so does the gentleman driving the truck need to learn just not to say stuff like that? Because he seems to be generally good-willed. He just says, hey, you sure are pretty, but I don't get the impression he means anything more by it than... Right,
but that's the point, is that's the time that you're living in, is that women are expected to just smile and go, thanks, or whatever. And now... Thanks. This literally in the last year or two, or last 3 years, women have gone, you know what? You don't need to be commenting on my appearance. Like, I don't know you. You're not, I'm not dating you. I'm not looking to date you, and there's no reason why you should think I am. So just don't comment on my appearance. Like there's actually we've been watching it's not a reboot, but the reunion 90210 show. And I love the fact that Steve Sanders or the Ian Ziering's character is like, God, like women are, what is wrong with women? Because now he's like divorced or getting divorced. So he's just kind of flirting with women, and he keeps commenting on their appearances, and they're all like, but I didn't ask you what you thought of my appearance. Like they're
My
all
eyes.
irritated. Like,
I didn't ask you
why
if
are
you
you
thought my
commenting
eyes
about
were
my
pretty.
eyes? Yeah, why are you talking about my eyes? And he's
I don't
like,
know
what
what
is
to
wrong
say.
with women? So
I'm
it's
just
clearly
glad that I don't have to navigate any of this. But
Yeah.
I wanted to mention some other stuff about how these films are like Halloween or not like Halloween. How this film is like Halloween, and or not. And one of them is that both of those movies, Halloween and Friday the 13th, even though that one's suburban, this is country, nevertheless, they both, I believe, work super hard to set up their world, as far as giving you a real clear feeling of like what the shape of the world is. I mean, this movie, maybe because it's the cheapest thing they have in front of them, or the most expensive thing they didn't have to pay for, the beautiful countryside is just played up everywhere. They're all over this camp. They're looking at the rustic, everything. The rusted old generator and these old cabins and the beautiful trees and the lake, the crystal lake that is like a big mirror for all of the trees surrounding it. Everything is just incredibly gorgeous. It sets up this world, and again, that's what. In fact, yeah, other than the fact that everybody gets killed, I kind of really love the world that this film takes place in. It kind of doesn't.
Unfortunately for you, Jason, if you were to be in this world, you would get killed.
I would get
because
killed.
You would be doomed.
Jason, unless he's Jason.
I'm
Well, he
not-
gets
That's
killed.
true.
Actually, if he's
Yeah.
Jason, he gets killed first, and then he comes back.
Yeah.
And then he comes back.
The other I have to say also, music is really wonderful here. This score that they have, and it's not one of the big giallo composers, like you would expect. It's Henry Manfredini, who is an American composer, but he's very good, and it's a very sort of psycho influenced score. A lot of like big string stings and stuff, and I think it's wonderful, wonderful music. Do you think it's possible, guys, that the ripoffs, the so-called ripoffs that we think of, or another way to put it, the formulaic films, don't quite come here any more than they come after Halloween? Like many people have said that the Halloween and Friday the 13th formula really comes from like Friday the 13th Part 3 and on, and Halloween 2 and on, and because these two are kind of standalone films. I think you could watch Halloween and Friday the 13th and not watch any of the others, and you'd kind of be fine.
Well, that's kind of why I feel like it's almost like you should watch this movie. Like you start it to, if I were to recommend somebody, like, okay, I've never seen a Friday the 13th movie, I would tell them, start it to maybe watch through final chapter and then go back and watch Friday the 13th, because it almost works better as a prequel, because it's full of early installment weirdness, what they call early installment weirdness.
Say more about that. I love this concept of early installment. First of all, tell us, what is the concept of early installment weirdness? And then why
early installment weirdness is, on TV tropes, it's best defined as like a film series that's long running, and like it takes a few episodes of series to get all of its tropes codified. Like Friday the 13th is a very good example of it, because in this movie, the killer is not Jason. Jason doesn't show up like in a physical form until like the last few minutes of the movie. He's talked about, but he's just part of this legend of Camp Blood. He's not, he doesn't have a physical presence in this movie per se. You don't have hockey masks. You don't have, again, even Alice as a final girl, she doesn't really fit like the sort of virginal trope that we think of as this thing. So Friday the 13th, as it went into like its sequels, you actually get what you think of is the tropes of Friday the 13th. Until when you get into like Friday the 13th, the final chapter, you have Jason with a hockey mask on. He's bald. He's in a morgue. He literally gets off the slab in the morgue and goes out to kill some more people. And and there's a lot of nudity, and like like all of that. It takes 4 movies to solidify all of that. 4 movies. So it's funny to me, like when people talk about this film franchise, they're like, oh, they just remade the same movie over and over and over again. No, they didn't. These movies are actually a lot more inventive than people give them credit for.
That's something else that I wanted to mention. I think that the hysterical response that Friday the 13th got from critics is way out of bounds. It has just nothing to do with...
Can I give you an awful bit of trivia to show us that celebrities have always been terrible and it's not just a recent thing?
Please.
No, we know that.
But I'm interested.
Gene Siskel hated this movie so much, he decided that he would publish Betsy Palmer's address. So he was so disappointed in her, this wholesome ingenue from the 1950s, that she would be in this movie. He decided he would publish her address in his review.
But he published the wrong address.
And he published an address, but jokes on him, I guess. Yeah. But I think that is so petty,
obnoxious. No, it's horrible,
so unbelievably. Whatever you thought about the movie, write a nasty review, whatever. But come on. Harassing a middle-aged movie. Yeah. Well, so the reaction to this movie from critics, critics have never been kind to horror.
Well, and they also spoiled, Siskel and Ebert also spoiled the ending in their review.
Well, that also leads to the thing I've talked about several times, where maybe it happens less so because we have whole channels like Shudder, etc. But it still really bums me out when a director is too cool or too coy or doesn't want to even chance ruining their reputation by saying, oh, well, I don't really make horror movies. I make these other more palatable kinds of movies. I think of it as this or whatever. Well, I think of it as more of a comedy. Like, no, you made a fucking horror movie. Own up to it. Quit trying to, I'm sorry, maybe you won't win awards if people think that, but just get over yourself. And to continue, even in this age where we have tons of horror, to demonize that and hedge your bets to, I don't know, because it's purely, oh, well, if people say this, I'll get stuck in that. And I get it. I guess you want to have a career, but that just burns me up. I don't know. It really frustrates me. But it starts with stuff like that, where this is just garbage. This is awful. And the fact that people still think that mentality is there, and that's going to ruin their rep because they want to make art films, just bums me out, and it makes me not want to see the rest of their work.
Hey, before we leave this comparison, or we have kind of left it, but I wanted to come back to it real quick before we move on to other stuff. There's this bit in IMDb that says that although everyone compares this movie to Halloween, it's actually, this person's, whoever writing this particular little blurb says, it's actually more like 1945's And Then There Were None. And this is, And Then There Were None is one of the original slasher movies, although it's technically a detective mystery. If you look at the plot structure and how it progresses, 10 people isolated in a remote house or location, the prophecy at the beginning of the story, they will all be killed. People being killed off gorily by a mystery killer one by one, the bodies turning up here and there and everywhere, decorated in a hideous way. And all the way until the ending when the final girl faces off against the killer. Have you guys seen that film? What do you think about that?
Yeah, now I want to see it.
Yeah, me too. I'm kind of thinking that maybe I should switch because we're talking about our movie, what we're going to do for these next few weeks. Maybe I should switch mine from what I thought I was going to do to this one, because I'm really curious. I don't know how easy it is to find.
And Then There Were None?
Yeah.
Super easy, barely an inconvenience. That movie
we're so hooked on the damn pitch meetings.
Yes, but that movie's been made a million times, and it's available everywhere.
But I think that might be fun to do now, because to see if we are going to.
It's based off of an Agatha Christie.
Yep, 10 Little Indians, which is not a title that they're allowed to use anymore.
Right, of course. So that's interesting. So yeah, maybe we will visit that and see if we agree that that's this is based on that kind of.
If nothing else, maybe at some point we should dissect that, because that's intriguing, and
Mm-hmm.
It's a great idea. Likewise, Twitch of the Death Nerve. Yeah, those are the two that are talked of as being proto Friday the 13th. And then there were none, and Twitch of the Death Nerve, also known as Bay of Blood by Mario Bava, which is a grisly, grimy 1971-ish giallo picture where somebody's killing a whole bunch of people. Although I think they're all like members of a family. They're all like foppish, annoying, spoiled Italian rich people on a cul-de-sac next to a lake, if I recall. I've seen it, and this is just my unclear memory. But
I want to say I've seen bits of that, and I've at least passed by the cover. I don't know why I haven't seen that. I don't know.
What a great title, right?
I should fix it, yeah.
Hey, I don't know what Jason, where you wanted to go next, but I did want. We had talked before we started the recording about the name Jason, even though I know this film is not about him, but he is mentioned, and how there was this idea that he maybe should have been, that he was going to maybe be called Josh.
Well,
and I also want to add to that in the French version, I was right the first time. They call him. I think it's. Let me see. Was it Jamie? Let me see. It's. Let me find it again. Jackie.
A lot.
In the French dub, no, it's not Jamie. It's not Jamie. It's that in the French dub version, Jason is called Jackie in the original.
Really?
So that makes me laugh. So just to kind of ponder what's scarier, Jason, Josh, or Jackie. I think.
I mean, Josh. I have a feeling that if they were thinking from the beginning that he would come back as a killer, they would not go with Josh. Josh is just such a sweet name. Although then again, you think Josh Brolin is one of our toughest actors. So.
And I just don't know any. I don't know any creepy Jasons. Like my husband is. Not creepy in my opinion. I don't know any creepy Jasons. Like even if I don't know. I just don't think it's very scary.
The most famous. So the rationale is behind the name thing was that they thought Jason sounded more sinister than Josh. Your mileage may vary on that.
Yeah.
But
it depends on how creeped out you are by the fact that we have a host who suggests tying people to chairs. And
the reason why,
it just good point.
The reason why Victor Miller thought Jason sounded more sinister than Josh is that Jason was the name of his bully in grade school.
Really?
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. So there be a bully kids who might end up being reborn as an immortal monster stuck at the bottom of the lake.
Sure. And this Jason clearly is obsessed with like horror movies and all things creepy. So I guess he is a little creepy.
That's kind of something. I don't know.
How do you feel? How do you feel about hockey?
Who needs IMDb when you have Drew MDB? Well, also it depends too. Is it more scary that he's spoken in whispered terms, Jason Voorhees, or would it be more scary if everybody knew him as like Little Jimmy Voorhees, and then Little Jimmy Voorhees comes back as a cold-blooded killer, the way Michael Myers was a child?
It's a good point.
Like it depends, because it can be scary either way. But if everybody thinks, "Oh, sweet little Josh Voorhees," oh my God, I did not expect him to be. Little Joshy, I did not expect him to wield a machete and chop up people in wheelchairs who were disabled. That's scary.
Why? I would like to shift slightly.
Named Pamela.
Yeah,
that's not a particularly scary name.
Right. There's a lot of irony in the names. I mean, truly, because traditionally an obviously scary name would be something like Lucifer
Jack.
Malvolio, but the why does Jason? You know what? I'm not going to ask that question because it's about later films. I'm going to stick to here.
Well, clearly, what we need to do is Friday the 13th part two through whatever.
I mean,
I don't know what all. Right. I can't. We need to do some more Friday the 13th movies so we can ponder these questions.
I suppose, yeah, and it's not even fair, really, to think about Jason or any of these characters in terms of anything that happens after the film you're talking about, because that's just that's just not a way to judge a film unless there's just something interesting where you're like, hey, this is the first time where we see such and such a
I
thing.
think this movie does. I think you are right that this movie does work well enough on its own that if you did not have all these sequels sort of taking up their place in pop culture, that this would still be like an enjoyable double feature with Halloween
Sure.
or Nightmare on Elm Street.
Actually, thinking about the critical response, a lot of people really didn't like this, and I kind of have a feeling that what it was is that the critics are just reacting to this film. I guess went a little bit farther with the gore, and so you had Siskel and people like that just really overreacting because they kind of felt somehow that it was going to affect society, which was truly bonkers. Especially when you consider that Roger Ebert, who also thought this was a trashy movie, he thought that it was cruel. He thought it would teach people to be cruel. Roger Ebert liked trash. He liked trash. He wrote trash. He was very fond of high art and very, very low art. And it's weird to me how much this film just set people off. That is amazing to me. But I'm telling you, when you watch it today, I find it quite charming.
It
Except for the
feels quaint
occasional.
almost.
Absolutely. Yeah, it feels lovely. And again, then all of a sudden a girl will get an axe to the head, or Kevin Bacon will have a arrow poked through his,
But okay,
his
as I've
yeah.
said on every time we've talked about one of these movies, the violence in these movies is cartoonish. It looks like something out of an EC horror comic. It
Yeah.
does not, and in fact, as I've just said earlier, there was actually deliberate care to make sure that just over the top enough.
Yeah.
So like the idea that watching a movie like this is going to make you cruel is a little absurd to me. And some of the gentlest people I have ever met in my entire life are horror fans.
Yeah.
So like I don't know. I mean, this is obviously a hot button issue right now because, of course, we're having all the discussion about violent video games again, and I think the two things are interrelated. I don't know that there's actually any correlation between violent entertainment and violence in people. I think some people are just violent for different reasons.
Yeah.
I actually think that in some ways violent movies and not necessarily just horror movies but action movies too actually have a beneficial quality on society because human beings are inherently violent creatures to a degree, and we need some way to get that out in a more socially constructive way. So watching a film in a group where it's a lark instead of like, I don't know, going out and playing Fight Club or whatever is probably we're probably all a little better off for it. But that's just me.
Well, I mean, I think reality bears that out. The entire world watches violent films. Different countries have different levels of actual violence. It's just the two things just don't appear to be all that related. I'm just astonished to look back at the level of I don't know, vitriol. It's crazy. It's just part of the scene, though. It's just literally.
I will say this: Sean Cunningham. Like you look at guys like Wes Craven and John Carpenter, and this kind of goes back to the question that Julie was asking about what the difference is between this and Halloween. John Carpenter is an artist. Wes Craven is an artist. Sean Cunningham is kind of a journeyman director, and he's definitely about, he's got more of a Roger Corman attitude about his bottom line. He wants to make his money. And so maybe that's the other reason why this movie isn't as well regarded as Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street as a piece of cinema, because people kind of know, Sean Cunningham just isn't that guy.
Yeah.
He's not an auteur. And that's fine, though. Like most movies aren't made by guys like that.
You're totally right. And yet what I'm thinking of is the fact that I often find more inspiration watching something that has been less analyzed. Maybe something would be less analyzed because there's frankly less to analyze there. But I think somehow those less trod grounds offer up more. because they kind of give you new branches to wander down that maybe haven't been. So I think artists should spend a heavy percentage of their time watching stuff that is overlooked and reading stuff that is overlooked rather than the
Well, it was
same.
kind of goes back to what we've talked about before, and I was telling somebody else this, and again, this is my opinion. Your mileage may vary, but if somebody who is complaining about, oh, I don't know what to pick on Shudder because I've been burned by all these movies that are the same, and I don't feel like there's much coming out. I said, well, if you're a creator, you don't have to do this, but you're much better off if you watch the movies. You have your idols and you're like, man, I want to make movies like that.
Yeah.
But if you watch the movies they watched or the movies that influence them, and if you can, because it's more likely now because of the way digital archives work, if you can watch the movies their heroes watched, if you can go back that far, if it's not, and
Absolutely.
you're going to gain a lot. It's the reason why, even though it seemed I was wasting my money at the time, the fact they got the equivalent of an art history minor, they couldn't say it officially, but that's just stupid college semantics. When I went to SCAD, I don't regret that I got that now, because when I need to, I can dredge up some interesting art and look at those influences and kind of figure out how, if I can use that or how that influences other things in my art.
Absolutely.
And I think those are the things that people forget. If you don't want to just rip off the whatever's popular of the day, you can go back further and figure out how was that created, and I think you have a much richer palette to draw from. Not to say that you have to do that, but I point that out when people use this is all the same, and why is it this? Why aren't you looking at that?
No, absolutely. Just think about how annoying it is, to give an example, that everybody over the past, 20 years has been so influenced by the fact that they all saw The Matrix,
Yeah.
Just think about it. I love The Matrix. Matrix is fabulous, truly fabulous. But Jesus Christ, after that, every single action movie borrowed so much from The Matrix. And what was The Matrix really doing? The Matrix was really reinterpreting a bunch of cool stuff they got from John Woo,
Mhm.
Awesome, really great. But what if instead
And a bunch of noir?
Yeah, exactly. How about you watch some John Woo, but then you also go off and watch some other Hong Kong cinema or some other noir, and kind of, if you want to create your own voice, you can't read all the same stuff. It's just wrong. Yeah. So anyway, if you're gonna make a big deal about how brilliant Halloween is, you still got to watch Friday the 13th. I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah. And anyway, who gives a shit what other people think? If you, this is my other thing. I just don't care anymore. I think there's some beauty here. With that in mind, what a horrible thing to say. That was probably not very mean, very, very PC of me to say. Who gives a shit?
I think you do have to figure out a certain amount of that when you're creating, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Design by committee almost never works.
Yeah. So let's get our final thoughts on this 1980 film, Friday the 13th. It's been so exciting talking about this. My goodness. And we'll go in the same order we did before. We'll start with our Virgil of the world of Friday the 13th, Mr. Drew Edwards. Drew, what are your final thoughts here?
Hot damn, this was a good conversation. I kind of figured it would be, but just such a pleasure in getting everybody's different takes on it. Even Julia, who was a little bit more lukewarm to it than the rest of us, just had such great thoughts. And I love this franchise. I mean, that is a well-known fact. So I will always, any chance we get to visit this universe, I'm like, strangely, this was Jason's idea.
Yeah.
And or maybe that's appropriate. But I think, I've had so many thoughts about this movie that I've never actually been able to get out in a public forum until now, especially my thoughts about the opening sequence and how it sets up the universe of Friday the 13th, not just in this film, but in all the films that follow. And I'm glad there's actually now a public record of that, at the risk of sounding like I'm stroking my own giant nerd ego. But it's something I've said in conversations about this movie for years. years. So like I'm glad that I've been able to get that particular level of word vomit out. And again, just bouncing off the rest of y'all about this tonight, rewatching the movie with like that sort of analytical eye that I don't always watch it with. Because a lot of the times when I put on these movies now, I've seen the Friday the 13th movie so many times, I can just put them on as background noise. This time I like really watched this and just got so much pleasure out of it. So thank you, Jason, for suggesting this. Lovely talk. And
Oh, great.
I really love this movie. So like that is anybody though. So
fantastic. Thank you. Julia, what are your thoughts?
Well, so yeah, thanks, Drew, for your comments. I think, like I say, I don't enjoy super gory movies. It's pretty funny because I usually close my eyes or like watch it through through closed fingers, like just with the tiny crack between my fingers, if it's going to be gory. And so I did that this time. When the poor girl gets killed with the axe in the bathroom.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, it's over. And I took my hand away, and that's when they actually showed. I was
Yes.
like, God damn it. It was so gross. I was like, oh my God, so gross. But the fact is that the effects are so preposterous. Like, well, I should say the murders are so preposterous. I mean, I suppose if somebody was actually a coroner or whatever, they'd probably be like, no, there's stuff like that that's horrible that actually happens. But in my mind, I'm like, there's so few and far between the kinds of murders that we see in this movie, I think, in real life, that it's not that scary, because it's more like, okay, those are horror movie murders and not just whatever. But I don't know. But like, obviously, people's throats get slashed and what have you. What were you gonna say, Tony?
Oh, well, I mean, I told the story before, but having actually seen somebody with a machete in their head at a
Yeesh.
hospital, like,
Okay, well, so maybe it is real. I don't know, but I don't know if that's what it looks like.
It looked, I mean, the one I saw, they had her all wrapped up with, a towel, keeping her walking around, keeping her ambulatory so they could wait to do surgery. But it did look like kind of, there was a handle facing, pointing forward. There was a blade that was sticking out of it did look like a Halloween prosthetic, strangely enough. But yeah.
I don't know. I just know that it's very, very gory, this film. And so that bothers me. The sexism just is what it is. It's bothersome, but it's also true to the way things were. But it's been a fun conversation to kind of analyze all the different parts of this and sort of slasher films in general. And I'm surprised it took us this long to get around this movie, honestly, because it's such an iconic horror film. So, I am glad that we did it. And, I don't regret having watched it.
Wow. Wonderful. Thank you. Tony, what are your final thoughts?
Again, I like the movie. It's not one of my favorite movies, but you have to see, once you see it as what other movies build off of, even if it's kind of like you say, I think a lot of the rip-off movies borrow more heavily from 3 than this one in general. It's kind of overlooked, but also I want to add, I had forgotten and love Ron Milkey's performance as Officer Dorf, which is that character is just such a bizarre, weird cop character.
It's like, you guys been smoking that reefer?
The whole thing is somehow like I understand, because I've been around police officers in rural areas that aren't too far from that, but also just how he does it. It's just so weird and an interesting part of this movie. But yeah, in general, it's cool, and I'm glad we finally got around to doing it. It's not my personal favorite Friday the 13th movie, but without it, we don't get everything else. So definitely it's, and an interesting, that's what 1980 was like. Spare us from the Neds of the world. They're still out there, by the way.
Oh God, yes.
But good grief. And then growing up, and I didn't go to a camp like this, but just knowing that kind of person, just he can't be killed enough in this kind of movie. Perhaps that's where we get these very cathartic moments when the Neds of the world get their comeuppance. Even if it's by someone who looks like could be your friend's mom.
Ned is fascinating because he's one of those people that if he was actually part of your group, you'd constantly be trying to figure out, do I just ignore the stupid things he's saying, or would you go, Ned, let's just be cool just for a few minutes while we let the officer get on his way, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like Jesus Christ, like why exactly? Well, one can presume, by the way, that all these guys got this job and then met up in some nearby bus station where they all wound up, and now they're riding into town together. Because I don't presume that they're all friends. I wouldn't think.
No, they've come here and paired up, and yeah.
Yeah, and poor Ned. It must suck to be Ned, by the way. To really
I mean, maybe he's
try.
covering up something, but I don't know. In my opinion, the Neds of the world never kind of get why they're the Neds of the world. But anyway, I digress.
No, you may be totally right. I was just thinking.
Self-awareness is not
Yeah.
a strong trait
Yeah.
for him and people like him.
Yeah. Oh, you go through life going, "Am I being Ned right now?" That's worth, this.
You had posted, Jason, that thing
mean-
about how ask your what is it that you were like, are you be cool like who is it?
Oh,
It was
Blake, Mr. Charlie. It was my brain has stopped working right now. It was who
Well, I think
played?
starting with not wearing a headdress
Yes.
and
John
makeshift
Forsythe.
loincloth.
yes. And then so what was your thing, Jason? Ask yourself if you're being
Well, I did. I made a little meme that said, whenever you are faced with something really dumb that you might have an opportunity to do, you have to stop and ask yourself, would John Forsythe do this? Like, in other words, if somebody next to you
so
is like,
you gotta
Rachel-
add to that meme now. Am I being more like John Forsythe or more like Ned?
yes.
And do I need to adjust my behavior?
Yeah, because it's this picture of John Forsythe wearing a very actually Mrs. Voorhees like sweater, and he's just looking cool. And you're thinking,
Hopefully not about to murder a bunch of people.
would John Forsythe like gossip about somebody who's annoying on his plane? No, because he's too cool for that. Like, would he like yell at the pizza server? No. These are things that John Forsythe would he make stupid John Wayne impressions when there's a cop just asking them questions? No, John Forsythe would not do those things. So this is how I try to live my life is, would John Forsythe do this thing? And I try to walk that path.
So now you have the flip of that, or is this more of a Ned type of thing?
Yes. Lead us not through the valley of Ned.
Lead us not into temptation to act like Ned.
Yes.
That's super funny.
So yep. I have nothing else to add. I other than I really love this. We should get our endorsements. I'm dying to know what you guys have been watching. I know many of us have been super busy. So if you have nothing to throw at us, that's totally fine. But I, this is the time that I really benefit from hearing what you guys are watching. So Drew, we'll start with you. What are your endorsements?
Well, I finally got to crash out a few days ago and do nothing for several hours. So I chose to watch the TV series What We Do in the Shadows, which is based off of a film, which is I also highly recommend. But the TV show, which follows a group of socially inept vampires in Staten Island, New York, and there also has their sort of Renfield character as well, and how badly they treat him. And it is hilarious. The best character on the show is they have what they call an emotional or energy vampire.
Colin is great.
Yeah. While all the other vampires are like classic gothed out vampires in like capes and stuff, he wears a lot of brown. He looks like a middle management guy, just basic white dude, color job, and he drains you by either boring you or annoying you, and then he drains your energy. So literally, so everybody has known this guy at some point in their
it's
life.
amazing.
Everybody, yeah. Great fun show. Like I like the movie. I will say this, like the movie, the vampire special effects and the werewolf special effects are far better than they need to be for a comedy. And so hats off to them for that as well. But yeah, if you haven't already, I think I'm actually kind of late to to the game with this show. But if you haven't already seen it, really recommend it.
I'm with you there, and it just came on to Hulu. I was not able to catch it on FX before, but it's on Hulu now. And Ray and I watched. Yeah, there's so many great touches that didn't have to be as good, and they are. I had a few people who hate it, and they prefer the movie, and that's fine. But I really dug it as well.
I mean, the movie is great. Like, if watch the movie if you haven't seen that as well. But the TV show is very good.
Yes.
That's a wonderful tip. Thank you very much. Julia, do you have anything to endorse?
Well, I finally got around to watching a show that's been recommended to me by many people, and that was Dead to Me on Netflix. And I watched the whole thing in one day. It's the whole all 10 episodes. I was like, oh my God, this is so good and riveting. I'm totally addicted. I love it. Can't wait for the next season. I'm just bummed that there's only the 10 episodes to watch, but it is so good, so interesting, great acting, really fun. It's Linda Cardellini is basically I was gonna say BFF. It's a very complicated relationship that she has with Christine Applegate, who's the main character, and they're so great together. And I don't know, it's super fun. James Marsden, really, really neat show. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch it, check it out.
Thank you for that tip. Tony, what about you?
A couple things. I'm early into both these series, but so far I've been pleasantly surprised. The new Dark Crystal series is beautiful. We'll see how the story plays out. They changed one thing that I found weird, being a huge fan of the original movie growing up. So I'm interested to see if that is just now canon or they redid some things. But the puppeteering, the special effects, everything is just fantastic. I'm so amazed that they chose to, use limited CG and do this show the way that they do it. It's really amazing. And the other one I came across, Rain found this and said, "Hey, you want to watch it?" An anime that's on Netflix called Carol and Tuesday, and it's about a musician duo who find each other and I'm guessing find success. It's told in that kind of flashback manner of, hey, here's the thing that happened and here's what led up to it. But so far it's really great. It's by the director of Cowboy Bebop. So it's a couple of girls who form a duo, and it takes place on Mars, which is interesting. Produced by Bones, if that matters to any other anime fans out there. But yeah, Carol and Tuesday, we watched several episodes, and so far I'm really, really digging it. I'm a sucker, of course, for musical animation. So, this hit all the spots so far. And the songs that they've been playing are, they're pop, but they're really done well. So I'm super stoked about that. I'm hoping it holds up.
Fantastic. I have only one endorsement this week, which is an odd one, but it's because of the changing seasons. Now it's Labor Day weekend, and so we're thinking more towards Halloween. And so this is the time that I always crack out two sound things on YouTube and listen to them. And one is John Ottman's score of a film that none of us is really crazy about, which is Halloween H2O, but it had the most killer rearrangement of the Halloween theme that I'd ever heard. And so John Ottman's H2O score, play it. It'll put you in the mood for the season. And the other is, what is it called? The House of Halloween Horror, which is it's a Michael Bell audio drama that I first heard way, way back when I was a kid, and is still really spooky. It took up the entire half of an LP that people would pass around at parties, and it's killer, and I'll post it on the page.
And Jason, you were telling me about something you were watching earlier today that Tony and Rain had done. Do you remember?
Their video? Well, I don't know if we can talk about that yet. So we'll talk about it soon.
Then you can cut off.
I mean, we are doing a video for our song "Die by the Sword," which I wrote originally for another band, and Rain sings it way better than I ever did. So lyrics by me and vocals by Rain and touch-ups here and there. But we're making a video, and it uses comics panels from the book. We're hoping to enter it, but it'll be up eventually. So
yeah. So we'll talk
if you
about that
haven't
more
listened
when
to it. You can find Rise from Fire on I think everything but Pandora currently. So
cool.
Die by the Sword, not to be confused with Slayer's Die by the Sword. It's a totally different song.
It's a very cool song, and I cannot wait to share the video with people. That is just going to be so fun. You guys look great. Everything looks great. Can't wait. All right, guys, this has been a really wonderful movie to discuss. I can't wait to be back next week with more crazy stuff. Those of you who are listening, bring your friends along and come to the Facebook page. Talk to us. We will totally engage with you. Everybody, have a wonderful week. Thank you, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.
Night.
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 You're doomed.